certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Kira Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
WA gripped by fear.
All members of Western Australia have got a responsibility because these are our daughters and sisters.
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
Until now, the man accused of the Claremont serial killings has been unexpressive in the dock. Today, for the first time, he showed emotion. We also heard from Bradley Edwards' second wife, who said she feared for her life during their relationship. I'm Natalie Bonjolo. Welcome to Day 4 of Claremont, the Trial in Conversation, and joining us is Tim Clarke and Emily Moulton from the West. Hi to you both.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Today really seemed like a parade of former lovers.
Yeah, it was quite... Yeah, we were just saying it's almost like a time of your life, or this is your life sort of moment today, and you know, no one would sort of want to have all their ex-relationships dredged up from the past, especially if they're over 20 years ago. So,
well, I certainly wouldn't. No, it was a bit of ex-wives and sex life today, Nat. And I don't know really how far it took us, but it was certainly interesting listening, nonetheless.
And I mean, was it quite intimate questioning about their sex lives?
Yeah, it was quite intimate all round. I mean, there was questions about, obviously, how they met and first dates and where they went, and talk of, you know, roses and lightning strikes, and it was all quite personal in a very impersonal setting. I mean, we certainly learned more about his relationships, but the reason for that questioning was very similar to the last couple of days, in that the prosecution had tried to establish, obviously, what type of man Mr. Edwards is, but more specifically, I think, what he looked like and the cars he drove, and what he was doing at certain times and certain places on certain dates.
Did the four women paint a similar picture of a similar man, or were they quite different?
I think the only one that was really different was perhaps the second wife, but I think the past girlfriends all seemed to say that he appeared to be a genuinely nice guy, but they also never dated him for very long.
Yeah, never really got to know him, I don't think.
And also it was sort of in his early 20s, or their early 20s, and I think one woman only actually just dated him. She said there was no sexual relationship and she wasn't attracted to him in that way, and she sort of said on the stand when they broke up, like, she told him that she didn't want a serious relationship with him, and she said he was very gracious about it and took it very well. The other woman that was sort of on the stand this morning was I guess probably one of the ones that you could say was actually his girlfriend for a longer period of time than the other two. She was an older woman, and they had a sexual relationship, but she said that he ended that relationship because then he met his second wife. But she still said he was quite nice about the whole thing, because she remembered when it was the end of the relationship, it was around her daughter's 18th birthday, and he still took her daughter out to lunch. So he was, I guess, still a gentleman in that sense.
And then the meeting with the second wife, that was done through work, when she said a lightning bolt had hit the computer store that she was working at. He had gone to fix the phone lines there. She thought it was an April Fool's joke, which is why she specifically remembers the date, April the 1st, 1997. And then there was, an ask out for a date, and she said they went to McDonald's, and she brought the young daughter that she had at the time because she wanted him to realise she wasn't just a woman, she was a package with a child. And so it's that type of really intimate detail that you don't often get in murder trials, apart unless they're sort of domestically based murder trials. But and then when the ex-wife, second wife, really got into her evidence, this is where these little, just absolute tiny little nuggets of something other than what the prosecution has been leading all these personal witnesses towards. We just got little flashes, little lightning bolts, I suppose, of something else going on under the surface.
It might be handy if we were now perhaps to give a bit of a timeline for listeners of who the four women are and the years that they dated or married Bradley Edwards, just so that people can picture them in the timeline, and then we can maybe talk a bit more about, there was obviously some bombshells with the second wife, and then we can get into that.
So the first wife, who was the first witness, Mr. Edwards met her in late 88, early 89. He was basically straight out of school, straight into his job, and he met her, and that was a bit of a lightning romance. They moved in together quite quickly, and then, as we learned sort of earlier in the trial and in the podcasts, there was talk of marriage very early on in the relationship in sort of mid-1990, which he admitted had put him under pressure, which he then said was the catalyst for the Hollywood Hospital incident. But they did get married in November 91, I think, from memory. Mm-hmm. And then that relationship lasted about, basically until late 95, early 96, when it broke down through the first wife meeting another man. He moved in, and then all that, basically the marriage collapsed, and that's when prosecutors say that the emotional turmoil clicked in, and the three murders occurred. It was that sort of 95 to 97 period when the Telstra living witness, so-called witnesses, so this man or mystery man driving around Claremont in the Telstra car, and the two women that we heard from today were over that time period, over that 2-year period, right. which is why obviously they were called to say what Mr. Edwards looked like, because that's going to relate to what the girls who say they were were picked up in this Telstra car over that time, what that man looked like, what he said he did for a living, and the car he was driving. So that's all that relevance. And then 1st of April 97 was where that relationship was said to start. 3 days later, Kira Glennon's body is found, and then there was never another murder, and as far as we know, and the prosecutors say, going back to the emotional turmoil evidence, that was because Mr. Edwards had found his second wife and her stepdaughter, and they very quickly got into a very serious relationship. They married in 2000 and were basically still married right up until his arrest. They apparently separated some months before that, but the stepdaughter in that relationship was still living with Mr. Edwards on the day he was arrested in December 2016. So that's the timeline, and that's some of the relevance of around the evidence over the last couple of days.
And so the second wife, when she was questioned, and she mentioned that she had feared for her life and she was terrified at one point, that was in the very last stages of their marriage. And how did that come about?
She was asked about why she was recording these bank statements. So the prosecution was asking her about her journal, and this journal that she had was recording information from Bradley Edwards' bank statements back from like the mid-90s. So when Carmel Barbagallo asked her, well, why were you recording, why were you taking note of these? And then she sort of quickly slipped out, because I feared for my life. But then she was also quickly shut down afterwards.
By who?
By the prosecutor, by Ms. Barbagallo.
So no one asked her, well, why did you fear for your life?
No. So we didn't get to hear why.
It was just like a hand grenade sort of lobbed out there with the pin half out, but it never went off. It was all very strange. And then there were another couple of snippets as she continued to give this evidence about how she was scared stiffness, and how she was under so much pressure while she was writing this notebook because she was in fear. But we never, it was never asked why, it was never elaborated on. And certainly when it got to the cross-examination by Mr. Jovich, he shut her down as well when she tried to sort of lead back into that subject. So, yeah, it was quite odd, quite a little bit frustrating, not to know the full story, because you certainly got the impression that the lady wanted to elaborate on it, but she just wasn't allowed to. And we're assuming this was because Miss Barbagallo thought she might become somewhat of an unpredictable witness, but whether they like it or not, those little nuggets are out there. And now here we are, and I'm sure readers and watchers and anyone is probably going to speculate on what they all meant.
That's right, because you must have been sitting there in your mind and thinking, ask the question, why isn't anyone asking the question?
Those of us in the media room were like, why? But why? And then we was like, quickly get back to typing and for the next thing. And but then sort of, I guess, then the question started, but going back to these bank statements and what were in them. And I guess the line of questioning then was Carmel brought up these specific dates of in 1996, I think towards the end of 96, where there was like withdrawals from ATMs, and two of them were at least from Bayview Terrace. So, and that would obviously go to the line, like I think in the beginning, on day one, you sort of heard that he had said that he had never sort of frequented that area during that time, I think. So I guess that those line of questions were going towards establishing that, well, he was in that area at some point. And
at the relevant time as well. So that was December 96, so that was slap bang in the middle of the sort of timeline of the murders. So for him to say he didn't frequent, and then one of the former girlfriends also said today that she certainly remembered them at least once going out to Claremont and spending time in the hotel with the big veranda, which we all take to be the Continental Hotel, which was obviously where Jane and Kira were last seen or spent some of their last hours. So, the reason for it is obvious. The evidentiary reason, they want to put him in Claremont. They want to put him in Claremont. They want to put him in Claremont, which belies what they say are the lies about him saying, "Oh, well, I never went there. I didn't know the place. I wasn't familiar with the area." So, it's interesting. I mean, and whether this woman, obviously her identity is suppressed by the court, but she's no longer under the sort of protective gaze of the prosecution now, because she's, as far as they concerned, as far as the court is concerned, she's done her job or done her bit. Right. So whether at some point she'll want to say some more, well, we'll just have to wait and see.
When she was talking about the bank statements, had she copied them, as in she had photocopied them? Had she written down notes from that period in time? No,
she said she found a bundle of documents, bank statements, in a drawer in an office in the house, and at the relevant time. And this was towards the end of their relationship, so we're talking about 2014 now. So these bank statements are nearly 18 years old. She'd found them, and it appeared had gone through them and documented all the series of cash withdrawals from the ATMs, and they were very, very regular cash withdrawals, on consecutive days, and for decent size amounts, $200, $300 at a time. And she'd gone through all the statements, notated what statement it was, notated the date, notated where the ATM was, notated the amount, and notated, in some cases, the day of the week. So she was obviously doing this for a reason.
Yes. It's a bizarre thing to do.
It is. It's quite a strange thing to do. But I think it's fair to say you can see from her state of, not state of mind, but the way she was addressing this issue, there was something going on.
I think she was. I think she was asked. Her response was why she was. I think she was asked why she was doing this again, and I think another one of her quotes was, "I was sick and tired of the lies."
Yeah.
But again, no one asked
but then
what lies.
Yeah, and then it stops, and then you're like, okay, but why?
Yeah.
What lies?
Yeah, and then this obviously was this notebook became presumably part of the evidence when the house was raided and gone through in 2016. Well, we think, or she might have handed over the notebook herself. Who knows? But it certainly came into the police possession, and they thought it interesting enough to introduce it into evidence today. So, so there it is.
It was also during the second wife's testimony that you saw home video. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
What did you see?
Yeah, these were once again just such an intimate thing to see in such a supposedly sterile environment. And going back to your very intro, Nat, this is where I was specifically looking at Mr. Edwards while the videos were playing and while he was watching them, and he was quite clearly smiling. He was as animated as I'd seen him throughout this whole process while these three videos were playing. So they were all taken sort of towards the start of the relationship with the second wife. So we're talking 97 around there. So this is after he's alleged to have committed all these crimes. One was of him with his car, the Telstra car in the background. Mm-hmm. Another was of a family trip around Perth, which was being filmed, which the second wife said was to send her family overseas to show them the sights of Perth without having to make the very long plane ride to get here. And then the second one, which was the one that Mr. Edwards really reacted strongly to, was footage of him playing totem tennis with his then stepdaughter, which was on the front of one of their properties. And I mean, it was just your classic family scene, really. Sunshine in the background, blue sky, colourful tennis rackets, green lawn, and this apparently loving stepfather and her stepdaughter enjoying some time together and joking around. So,
he's smiling, and is he smiling and he's nodding and
yeah, he was clearly reacting to it. The wife, or the second wife, was also clearly reacting to seeing this footage. She actually commented while it was being played how cute her daughter looked, how small her daughter looked. So it was obviously a very happy, treasured family time, and for that to be played in such an instance and for such a reason, it's very jarring sometimes to see those things taken completely out of context, and obviously used for one of the most serious prosecutions in Australian legal history.
Yeah. It almost feels a bit eerie to see such a happy time when it's a trial for such horrible.
Yeah. Absolutely. Eerie and a little bit voyeuristic. You feel like you're sort of intruding on something, but it wasn't just us watching. It was obviously, again, some of the families of the people that Mr. Edwards is accused of murdering. So what was going through their mind when they see that? And
was there any reaction from them?
They were actually behind me today, Nat, so I couldn't actually see because I really wanted to concentrate on what Mr. Edwards was how he reacted, because when it first flashed up on the screen, there was an obvious sort of physical sort of movement in the dock, and so that's what caught my eye.
Almost a ripple would go through when these moments happen. Something
like that. It was a little bit like the moment we heard on day one when we heard Sarah's voice. And it's another thing. You're sort of listening to words and you're trying to concentrate because you want to get it right, and then you're just hit with this completely sort of at times jarring image, and it can take you back a little bit sometimes.
And of course, the stepdaughter that you were looking at in those videos is the stepdaughter that was still living with him after they had separated and at the time of his arrest.
Correct. Yeah. And as we understand it, she will be a witness because she's on that list of witnesses' names that have been suppressed. And so, yeah, I mean, she today actually, did become a little bit part of the trial, and she will become a much bigger part of the trial as we roll on.
Were all of the witnesses today video streamed? Were any of them in the courtroom?
Mr. Edwards' best man from his wedding to his second wife, he was actually in the courtroom.
And the last witness that Anne mentioned there, Mr. Paul Luff, he's been a long-term friend of Mr. Edwards. He's actually the best man at Mr. Edwards' second marriage.
Though he couldn't remember it.
Even though that was a bit odd. Well, I suppose it was a long time ago. But
didn't remember the wedding at all, or didn't remember the date?
Didn't remember
being the best man.
Yeah, he said, I know I was the best man, but I don't remember the wedding.
Okay, it might have been a good wedding.
Yeah. And there was a little bit of a physical reaction from Mr. Edwards when he walked into court, presumably because they've been friends for so long, and who knows whether Mr. Edwards has even seen him for 3 years. But there was a little bit of a stiffening of the body and a widening of the eyes, apparently, and a thinning of the mouth when Mr. Luff walked in. And he again was giving evidence about, mainly at the heart of his evidence was his remembrance of how Mr. Edwards reacted after the breakup of his first marriage, which, as we often said, is supposedly the emotional catalyst for all this. And he was describing how he was very depressed. He began drinking more. He was worried for his friend's welfare. And how he was coping with it, basically. And he said, I spoke to him a number of times about how he was dealing with it all, but obviously was not asked and obviously didn't offer any hint as to what might have been going on in the real background. But once again, it was to put a timeline there, to put a sort of series of events together, which the prosecution way down the track will try and link together strongly enough for the judge to at least consider that as a motive.
And there were questions about the cars that he was driving at the time?
Yeah, it appeared sort of, I guess, Ms. Barbagallo was trying to establish sort of what sort of cars he knew he was driving, and he said he knew. I think they both had vans to begin with when they were. He said they started out as apprentices together,
right?
But worked in different sort of areas, and then he said that they both had vans, and then he remembered when Telstra started bringing in the station wagons, and he sort of made this sort of lighthearted joke that he was a bit jealous of Mr. Edwards because he got the station wagon first, and he still had to have a van. And then when asked why, he said, well, that was because of the work that Mr. Edwards is doing, so he was able to get a station wagon first.
And we know that the station wagon is potentially significant.
Yeah.
I mean, it's potentially one of it will be one of the main, pillars of the prosecution case, because they intend to very strongly point to these grey fibres that were supposedly, or have been found on the bodies of both girls that were recovered, and they link each other, and they link to the car, and they link to Mr. Edwards. So I mean that's the and the prosecution will keep try to hammer home to the judge that this was the car he had at the time, and there can be absolutely no doubt, because you've seen the pictures, you've heard the witnesses.
We've actually had a request from one of the listeners, Andrea Montanelloni. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Montioni? I'm not sure, Andrea. Sorry about that if we're getting that wrong. And she's asked if we could perhaps just give a brief explanation as to why is this case before a judge only and not a jury?
Obviously, the jury is at the heart of the justice system in here and most Western democracies. But at times, a judge can rule that he thinks that having a jury might be certainly not helpful to the course of justice, and this was one of those cases. The application was put on various bases. The first one, the obvious one, probably to everyone, is pre-trial publicity. So they say that if a judge thinks that it would be impossible for a an accused person to get a fair trial because of pre-trial publicity, and they wouldn't be able to find a big enough pool of jurors to have them sort of a clean jury, if you like, that don't have any knowledge of a case or don't have any predisposition towards a case. Then they will rule against the jury. And in this case, obviously, it's probably the most publicised case, certainly in Western Australia and in Australia. So that was one of the reasons. The second was the DNA evidence. A judge can take into account how complicated and how lengthy the DNA evidence or forensic evidence or technical evidence in a trial can be, and if they feel it would be too hard for a jury to follow. And as we discussed earlier in the week, the DNA evidence in this case is crucial, and it will be long, and it will be dense, and it will be heavy. So that was another reason. The third is the actual length of the trial itself. They will say if a trial is going to go on too long, or it's going to go on for very long, it will be a too big a impost on a juror to have to put aside all their life's trappings, personal jobs, all that, to come and sit in court every day. Obviously, this trial was always going to be lengthy, anywhere between 6 and 9 months. And so it was argued that to ask a jury to sit for that long away from their normal lives was too unfair. And then the fourth reason was the gruesome and graphic nature of evidence. And obviously in this case, all four of those things came together. If anyone is really interested and wants to read them, those reasons are actually available on some of the legal websites. You just need to look under Mr. Edwards' name, and you could find them, and also find other pre-trial judgments as well if the listeners are really interested.
And I guess we'd encourage anyone, if you've got any questions, get in contact with us, and Emily and Tim will try their best to answer them for you.
Yeah, only positive feedback, thank you.
Well, thanks for listening. Don't forget you can follow Emily's blog at thewest.com.au. You can read Tim's stories in the paper. And we understand a copy of the second wife's notes on the bank statements will be released soon. So those images will also be available on thewest.com.au. Thanks for joining us, both of you. And we'll be back tomorrow for Day 5 of Claremont, the Trial in Conversation.
This podcast was hosted by Natalie Bonjolo, produced by Kate Ryan and Alicia Preedy, and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media. Audio files were provided from the archives of the 7 Network and the West Australian. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au.